Welcome to Lunch and Learn, Introduction to Critical Information Literacy. My name is Morgan. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions about what we discuss. If you have any questions about this presentation, you can also contact the library in general, and any of the librarians would love to help you connect with resources or discuss with you what critical information literacy might look like within your classroom. So hopefully by the end of the session today, you'll be able to define critical information literacy, understand how critical information literacy and DEI are connected, and then identify opportunities for incorporating critical information literacy into your classes. So critical information literacy is something that we'll first start by defining in relationship to some other things. So when we think about critical pedagogy or critical theory, we're thinking about the power relationships between the teacher and the student and the information that they're consuming, the students and the relationships they have with others within the classroom, the students and the relationships they have with their own identity and the identities that are in that classroom space and outside the classroom space. It's really about the power relationships of all of these different identity categories, contextual circumstances and experiences, as well as the framework for education, which is typically the teacher or the person at the front of the classroom leads the class, and the people that are sitting in the chairs listening are the ones that are nodding along and being talked at. So critical information literacy builds on that by really thinking about how libraries participate in systems of oppression, just like we would think about that maybe the classroom participates in a system of oppression because it prioritizes the teacher over the students. Critical information literacy acknowledges that sometimes we prioritize the librarian over the student, and that the goal of critical information literacy is that there would be a sense of efficacy there, that students and librarians together could intervene in these systems and really prioritize the student, prioritize identities and experiences that have often been overlooked. And we would take that critical information literacy framework and we would think about how that shapes and interacts not only individuals, but also information. So possible themes in critical information literacy: race, LGBTQIA+, gender, class, and other identity categories, environment, conservation, and other human nature relationships, knowledge production and presentation. That can include publishing. It can include what we would define as scholarly information, peer-reviewed information, what librarians would describe as credible versus what we would describe as non-credible, what students would interact with and call credible, and what they would call non-credible. What information is accessible and to whom it is accessible. So there's a lot of knowledge production and presentation questions that arise in critical information literacy. The main thing is there's one consistent undercurrent in critical theory, critical pedagogy, and critical information literacy, which is power. Within any given relationship, there is a power dynamic there that shapes how we consume information, what information we consume, and then who gets to be a consumer, who gets to be a creator, who gets to be the person that drives the conversation, and who has to sit there and listen. And the main thing to understand is that with critical information literacy, power and the information that it produces cannot be separated from one another. So when we think about a peer-reviewed article and the information that's created in a peer-reviewed article, we also have to think about the power dynamics that got that information to that point. So I'm going to allow you to just take a few minutes at your own leisure to look at the differences between the ACRL framework for information literacy. The competencies are sort of the old way of thinking about it, and the frameworks are the new way of thinking about it. What you'll notice is that there's a very strong shift in language from this is what a student will do, this is how a student will produce knowledge, or this is how a student will show that they are literate. And then the framework actually takes a lot more what we would call critical language and identifies power relationships in how we consume information. So let's look at the visual literacy competencies really quick. This is the old sort of framework or way of thinking about a visually literate student. So let's just look at the first couple. A visually literate student determines the nature and extent of the visual materials needed, meaning that they know what they will need to use, what their need is, and how an image could meet that need. And then also a visually literate student finds and accesses needed images and visual media effectively and efficiently, meaning that they find the information correctly, ethically, and can identify where they can find the information. So for example, they're looking for a non-copyright image, they might go to Wikimedia Commons and look for non-copyright images there instead of going directly to Google and searching any kind of image that they might find. So there is some language in here that talks about the ethics of information consumption, but it doesn't get too specific. The framework is much more specific about the actual power within the relationships that a student would see with images, with metadata, with anything about or around the image. And when I say metadata, that just basically means like an image description or an alt text description can hold meaning and power that maybe the describer or the thinker or creator of that image isn't really thinking about. Or you can think about if there is no alt text for a particular image, that can suggest a relationship to power as well. But notice in this first one, learners participate in a changing visual information landscape. You can see here that the language is a lot more complicated, but I want to highlight this one phrase here. At each phase of this life cycle, humans introduce layers of meaning that reinforce systemic inequities and hegemonic notions of knowledge creation. The subjectivity can be exacerbated by how visuals are classified and described via text-based descriptions, which can perpetuate their own systems of power. So a student might feel like that language is a little incomprehensible for them, but one of the things that is really important is that this acknowledges the power that is taking place between the creator of knowledge and the information they create and the receiver of that knowledge. So if a student finds an image that I create, they might say, well, there's no alt text. I might not have thought of that because for me, I don't need it, right? But a student might say, well, I do need it. That is something that I need in order to consume this information correctly or to consume this information accessibly. So it reminds me that there is this system in which I might not be thinking about equity, but the student desperately needs that equity. And so this has us sort of thinking about what can librarians do to not only create equity and moments of equity, but also to teach equity when it comes to images. So students are learning things that are quite different than what they were learning before. A visually literate student, yes, can articulate the need for an image, but visually literate students in this digital age would also understand the relationship of power that an image brings with it. Not just visually what they see, but also the descriptions of those images. So you can see that there's a lot of difference in the language. As you read more into the documents themselves and the links themselves, you will see a huge shift. There is a lot of different content, a lot of different coverage. So librarians are working to incorporate that within many of their libraries. A lot of students are already thinking about many of these issues anyway. It just depends on what that could look like within any given classroom or any given context. It's really a matter of librarians are still figuring out what it means to have critical information literacy in the classroom. And it's not one of those blanket, just everybody does the exact same thing. It's something that has to be approached with a lot of thoughtfulness. But there are some ways to incorporate it in the classroom that are very sort of, I don't want to say basic, but they're kind of on the surface. Especially if librarians only meet with the class once a semester, just like a one-shot instruction. The librarians might incorporate critical information literacy in their session, but an instructor might say, well, you know, I can also do that kind of stuff. And so one of the things that students and faculty and librarians can collaborate on is how critical information literacy can appear in the classroom. So one of the ways it can do that is a librarian might consider searching for some of the following terms, like women and civil rights in the United States, race or class, and prison sentences, police and race and community relations, environment in North Carolina. It does not always work out that when you ask a student, hey, what is it that you're researching? Can you tell me what you want to research? That they will respond. Some of them, the students just don't feel empowered to respond. Some students are just more shy than others, and that's okay. The main thing that the librarian might do in this particular circumstance is represent information that helps to start a conversation and reinforce the importance of diverse thought, equity and inclusion of different identities and different relationships and power dynamics within any given information literacy research session. So if a student doesn't want to necessarily share what they're working on, this might be a good way to sort of say, okay, I recognize that these issues are happening outside the context of the library, so we're going to search for this to show that we're kind of paying attention to current issues that are impacting the students outside and inside the classroom. And then this could help students to feel more confident to drive the conversation. Now, they may not say, I want to search for any of these topics. They might just want to search for their favorite hobby, like basketball, and should athletes be paid? Maybe that's their topic. But if they are able to drive the classroom forward and really have a student-centered information literacy session, that shifts the power dynamic from the librarian to the students. And that allows the students to be the people that drive the conversation forward about information literacy, and allows them to be knowledge creators and not just knowledge consumers. Another way is that a librarian or instructor might ask students to review their research and or bibliography or any of the sources that they find to see if they're diverse, they come from a variety of diverse sources and locations, and a variety of voices and perspectives are represented. So if you had a student that found 3 or 4 different articles from the same peer-reviewed scholarly journal, you might say, well, you actually need to think more diverse and broadly about your topic, because pulling from the same journal may create like a very specific type of research that you're finding. And so we would think about what kind of information students have discovered and what kind of information do students feel like they can't include because we sort of said, as librarians and as instructors, this doesn't count as credible information. Does that allow us to really get a full picture of the diverse voices about a particular topic? Is it allowing for a variety of perspectives? What power dynamics are in place in what we expect students to find? And so it's just something to think about. It creates a conversation not just for the librarians and the instructor, but also for how students perceive and understand information. And then if a student is interested in searching pretty broadly and diversely in their research, maybe they're looking to cover a piece of literature or a person who is someone that they don't know much about or have not heard much about before. Or maybe there's a project in your course that requires students to pick a text or pick a person that the students would do research on. This might allow them some flexibility to discover people that they might not have known about before. People can be searched and text can be searched by gender, nationality, ethnicity. For Lit Finder, you can search for the author that way. So this can allow a student to find diverse resources from a variety of different perspectives that they may not have considered before just because they don't really know a person. Maybe they've never heard of them before. Why it matters? Critical matters, power, class, race, gender, status, whether that's a student or teacher or librarian, shapes each of our lives. So highlighting these issues encourages students to be aware, particularly if all the information they find reflects just one perspective, but also it helps them to pay attention to themselves as learners. Are they driving their own knowledge, or is it being handed to them in these very, traditional ways? How can they be prioritized? How can we center education and learning around the student? And how can librarians and instructors think about information literacy as a shape not only for our lives, but for students' lives as well, and be more aware of how we construct students' experiences and how we give them back the power within the classroom and within their own information literacy and learning experiences. So here are some other resources if you're interested in learning more about critical pedagogy. This might be more valuable for you as an instructor. And then if you want to see how we can incorporate critical information literacy, we could collaborate on that as well, if that is of interest to you. And feel free to reach out to the library if you have any questions. We will be happy to help students and help you to think through these various topics.